Hello there everybody, Sam's Trains here, welcome back to the railway and welcome to another review. Up to date I'm going to be looking at a very classic but also very famous Hornby steam locomotive. I was going to introduce today's locomotive as a beginner's model, but actually I think that's a little bit unfair. Now, I have been very guilty in the past of worshipping super expensive and super detailed models, but if you're someone who enjoys and buys and runs more basic, more inexpensive models, that does not make you any less of an enthusiast or any less of a modeler. Because actually sometimes, and in many cases, it can make a ton of sense to save £70 or so, and yes, that's an accurate figure, and buy the more simple railroad version of a Hornby model. Let's say, for example, you just enjoy running your locomotives more than you enjoy the accuracy and level of detail. Well, then you'd be a fool to spend 70 extra pounds to get some more detail when maybe you wouldn't really appreciate it. Or let's say, for example, you're a modeler on a budget. Why not buy the cheaper version of a model, because that way you get to do some modelling to bring it up to scratch, and that's what this hobby's all about, and also you won't break the bank. So bear all that in mind. Yes, this model is suitable for beginners, but if this appeals to you and you're not a beginner, there's nothing wrong with that. You buy whatever it is you want. So today's model is this. I wasn't kidding, it's a very famous locomotive. It is Mallard, and it is indeed the Hornby Railroad version of the Mallard, which costs around £70 less on RRP than the full-fat, super detailed Hornby A4, which is obviously a considerable saving. So the RRP for this is around £110 from Hornby, although Hatton's stock these for £94, and if there are any in stock at the time of release, I will include an affiliate link in the description. Yeah, anywhere around £100, that's what you can pick these up for, which is a fair price as far as I'm concerned for a modern locomotive. So today we're going to find out what this is like. We're going to see really what the level of detail is like. We will find out whether or not the mechanism is up to the same standard as the full-fat version of the models. I actually think that is a desirable feature, isn't it? Even if you are a beginner, even if you are a more casual enthusiast, even if you don't care that much about detail, everybody wants good performance, and for £100 there's no reason why this shouldn't have a really good mechanism. So we're going to find all this out today. Come with me, I hope you enjoy it. Let's take a look. And if you are interested in seeing what the full-fat Hornby Railways A4 is like by comparison, I will include a link to my most recent review up there. I will include a link rather than start showing it again in this video, because I only did it recently and that could get a little bit repetitious. So yeah, do that if you're not familiar with the full main range A4. Let's take a look at the railroad one today though. I mean, I love the packaging. It's got the special treatment, hasn't it? This is not the standard Hornby Railroad packaging, which I like very much. The version I have in particular is R3371. It is the LNER Class A4 Mallard, and of course it has Mallard's running number, which is 4468, quite famously. And as per most Hornby Railroad products, this doesn't have any sort of prototype history on the back of the box, which actually would have been really nice, wouldn't it? I mean, beginners especially will be more interested in that stuff. Chances are if you're going to spend nearly £200 on the super detailed version, you'll probably know a bit about them already. But that does mean that we can get straight into this today and take a first look. So if I can get the box open, we'll see what we've got inside. Now, I have looked at Railroad A4s in the past. I've looked at the Hornby TTS Sound version, and that was Gadwell, but that was years ago. I really want to see what the latest versions are like. Are there any differences? I don't expect there will be, I doubt it, but we need to find these things out. So here is the operation and maintenance guide for the Class A4 Railroad, which does have a slightly different chassis to the Railways one, I believe. So, yeah, fairly standard. Lubrication, close coupling, that's pretty good. Body removal, assembly. This does show that the loco and tender are electrically connected together. I've noticed it does say if your product includes a plug-in connection between the locomotive and tender, though. We'll have to look at the model and find out. So maybe my excitement about that is a little bit premature. On some non-sound fitted Hornby railroad products, they don't bother to connect the tender, the decoder socket is inside the loco, and therefore there's no tender pickups. Hopefully this will have tender pickups, because that makes a huge difference to the performance and the reliability of a model, I've found. And then on the back, brake rods. Okay, so you do have the option to fit brake rods. Whether or not they're fitted to the model as standard, I am not sure. Is there? Ah, yes, on the back there is a small accessories pack. So let's see what this includes. If I can peel it off, bear with me. This is always great, actually. It's nice, just even if it's something simple like a coupling or a brake rod, it is nice to have a little bit of something to fit if you're a beginner, isn't it? Because it's just little things like that that let you practice modelling. I do take issue if there's a whole massive bag of parts to fit and the model's basically unfinished, but just a few little bits like this is fine. So you've got a coupling, maybe that's for the front. You have the brake rigging as described, and also a little vacuum pipe for the buffer beam. So yeah, you can fit those if you want to, but I'm going to just fix this back onto the packaging and we'll take a look at the loco. Right, so I believe the front of the pack here is taped up, so you know what that means. We need everybody's tetanus friend, Rusty. So yeah, this does have the more fiddly, less protective and less environmentally friendly styrofoam pack. I suppose it would do a better job of protecting a model than the egg boxes, the paper sort of cardboard boxes that train sets and such come in. But to be honest, I do prefer the blister packs. They're easier to open, they're better for reuse, and they do tend to do a pretty good job of protecting locos. But like I say, these railroad models are quite basic, so it shouldn't harm them too much, pulling them in and out of packaging like this. Now it looks like someone spat on this, because there's like a bit of greasy lubricant on the side of the tender, so I'm going to take care of that straight away with an oily rag, which is probably not the best thing to use. You do get that sometimes. I think it is the lubricant rather than condensation, but most of the time it doesn't leave any permanent marks, and I can see there's actually more on the tender here. It's funny. Yeah, you do tend to get that sometimes. Factories do tend to over lubricate models. Right, can I get this out? I'm going to have to use the holes. I believe there are holes in the back of this pack, but I'm going to see if I get any luck by pulling it out with the plastic wrap, and yes I have. Okay. Alright, so even though this is a cheap model by comparison, and even though it is admittedly a simple model, I don't know, this still captures the grandeur, doesn't it, of the A4. And I've never seen an A4 model that does not do that. You've got the very ancient Bachmann ones, not very detailed, not very accurate. They still capture the charm and class of the real A4. Even the really old-fashioned Hornby Dublo or Wren A4s, they still do this. I don't know what it is about the class, but it's very difficult, it seems, to make a bad model of it. And look at this thing. I mean, this, from any sort of distance, and even from up close really, looks absolutely superb, doesn't it? It captures the elegance, the proportions, the shape of the class just beautifully. And on first glance, for around £100, this looks very, very, very reasonable indeed. So, little bit of history on the A4 class, then I will take this up close and we will see just what sort of detail this has, whether or not it's acceptable for £100, I think it probably will be, and then later on we'll take a look at the mechanism, see how it compares to the full fat version, and of course see how the thing runs. I'm really looking forward to this now. It's great to have a classic on screen again, isn't it? Okay, let's do it. So, the A4s were a class of LNER Pacifics designed by Sir Nigel Gresley and introduced for the first time in 1935. The first locomotive wasn't Mallard or anything like that, it was Silverlink, which actually broke quite a lot of records during its first run. From the very start they were very impressive and very speedy locos. The A4 though was made most famous by this loco, Mallard, known also as the world's fastest steam locomotive, achieving that title in 1938 at just a smidge over 126 miles per hour. The A4s were based on the earlier Class A1, which was also a Gresley design, introduced around 15 years prior to this one. 35 A4s were built in total. Mallard, along with 5 others, have been preserved, which is wonderful, and all members of the class did retain this streamlining permanently. Some had valancers over the driving wheels and others didn't, but unlike other classes, the Coronation for instance, they did actually keep the streamlining all through their lives, which is great. So there it is, the Hornby Railroad A4 Mallard up close and personal for you. And actually, for what it costs, this is a superb looking model, isn't it? For around £100, there is really no major cause for complaint with this. It's very good indeed. Unfortunately, my example did not arrive with me in perfect condition, and in fact quite a few of the handrail holders on the tender have arrived broken. As you can see, there are two there that are broken. And that is particularly unfortunate with a model like this, because one of the main advantages of the Railroad range is the improved durability due to the lesser detail. And if models are arriving damaged, then that is no longer an advantage. That said, I do suspect the packaging played a part in that. I remarked at the time that styrofoam blocks like that don't do a great job of protecting models. It's also very difficult to manoeuvre models in and out of such packaging, and the styrofoam is also not at all environmentally friendly. So as far as I'm concerned, there is no advantage to such packaging, and I think Hornby should work to find a better packaging solution. That being said, the quality overall of the model is really good. The weight, for instance, is mind-blowing. It weighs 463 grams, which is considerably heavier than the full-fat main range A4s, which weigh in at 396 grams or around that region. So yes, go figure. You've got die-cast underframe, so you can see the rear pony truck. On the much more expensive Hornby Railways A4s, that piece there is a loosely fitted plastic part, which is nowhere near as good as this cheap Railroad one. You've still got quite a few metal parts, such as the safety valves, which are inset into the top of the cab, so the finish on those is fantastic. Again, many very expensive models don't have metal safety valves. Same thing with the whistle in front of the double chimney there. That is a very nicely produced metal piece, which looks fantastic. The front buffer beam actually looks fantastic. You've got the running number on there, separately fitted coupling hook and also vacuum pipe. You've even got sprung buffers, as you can see, or some sprung buffers, I should say, because for some reason the buffers on the tender are not sprung. So yeah, go figure, doesn't make much sense. You would think if a loco was going to boast a feature, it would have that feature across the entire model and not just in select places. I assume the tender was designed at a different time from the loco, perhaps. Maybe it's an amalgamation of two different models, but yeah, that's a bit strange, isn't it? Overall then, so the finish looks fantastic. Again, you've got a little bit of a satin sheen going on there. The finish is better, again, than quite a few of Hornby's more expensive models. The decoration is definitely toned down on the Railroad A4s though, as you can see by the decorated font on the side of the cab and also on the side of the tender. They don't use more than one colour. You don't have the sort of shadowing and outline effects that you would on the real things. I mean, that's fine, it's reflected in the price. This is supposed to be a basic Railroad model, but obviously that is a considerable downgrade from the main range version. The nameplates though look fantastic. They are separately fitted, and I don't think they're extra or anything like that. I think they are just plastic parts, but they look superb, don't they? Again, they look better than many Hornby nameplates I've seen in the past. And all of the key decoration is present, isn't it? The garter blue looks spot on. You've got the lining around the front end, which isn't quite as accurate as on some models. And also, as you can see, there's a little bit of smudging going on. But again, these are not deal breakers as far as I'm concerned. And as you can also see, the level of detail on the body is fairly satisfactory, isn't it? Plenty of moulded detailing, lots of rivets and such. You do have the separately fitted handrails and also the separately fitted pipework underneath, which is pretty great. The cab area does show what a basic model this is actually. There is no glazing or anything like that, which is pretty obvious, and the handrails around the cab are quite obviously just moulded, and as a result they don't stand out anywhere near as much as the actual separately fitted ones do, although of course they won't break off like some of the separately fitted ones have. And of course inside the cab, while there is quite a lot of moulded detail, which would look great if you were to paint it up yourself, none of it comes painted from the factory, which is again quite a noticeable difference between this and the full fat A4. This locomotive does feature the full Woolshirts valve gear, although as you can see quite a few of the rods and also the pivot points and such do look very noticeably chunky. On the more detailed Railways edition, these are much finer and more realistic looking, but again, this is perfect for beginners because it's going to be a bit more durable. And the wheels are still nicely realised. As you can see, they are painted into the red, which looks great, and even the axles have been painted over as well. They're not the fully moulded wheels with the realistic centres, but from any sort of distance they look perfectly convincing. So the loco itself is fine. The tender, I suspect, is an older model perhaps. I say that because the coal load is very unrealistically chunky, isn't it? Later Hornby Railroad models than this have had more realistic coal loads, but this one is noticeably chunky, and it's also very tall, which suggests this tender will originally have been produced there, which suggests that this tender will have been designed with the Ringfield motor in mind. I assume once upon a time this tender would have housed the Ringfield motor system, and that could explain why the weight is quite high, because it is a heavy tender on this one. So yeah, I do wonder whether or not it's still got the Ringfield chassis inside there. I guess I might open it up and take a look. That being said though, the underframe looks pretty decent, doesn't it? The level of detail there is easily up to modern standards, I would say. So that's not a problem, and you've also got the very finely separately fitted controls on the front end of the tender too, which is a nice little touch of detail for what's supposed to be a basic model. And then around the back, a lot of these details are just part of the moulding, and the lamp brackets in particular look quite big and chunky, don't they? But you do have the steps and those separately fitted handrails, and then the separately painted buffer beam, which of course does have space for the vacuum pipe to be fitted, and of course the tension lock coupling is fitted from the factory to the back of the tender there. So there you go, that is an overview of the level of detail. For the money, it's obviously perfectly adequate and looks pretty good, I would say. Obviously, it's not a patch overall on the Hornby Railways version, although quite unbelievably it does have one or two advantages in terms of its weight and the die-cast construction, particularly of the underframe and the chassis. So very surprisingly, the full-fat Railways version does not beat this railroad model on all counts, which I expected it would. So we're going to take a look at the mechanism. I will talk about the features, what it has, what it doesn't have, how it compares to the main range, and then of course I will give it its first ever test. So I'll be back in just a second. Let's do it. So there she is then, the Hornby Railroad A4 Mallard down onto the track, ready for the first test. The mechanism, I would say, for a beginner is more or less adequate, but to someone like me who has seen a lot of mechanisms, it is clear that this mechanism has been cut back. There are lots of cost-saving measures at work on this mechanism, some of which are sacrificial to the performance and the reliability of the loco, and at £100 or thereabouts, I don't think this is reasonable. It is £100, it's not 20. I think if you've spent £100 on a model, you do deserve to at least get the best performance you possibly can. So let's talk about pickups. Unfortunately, there are no tender pickups on this locomotive. I thought there might be looking at the instructions, but no, there is no electrical connection between loco and tender, and as you can see, as a result, yes, there are no pickups on any of the tender wheels, and this is particularly frustrating because the infrastructure's there. There is the gap for the electrical plug to go, which means that they just haven't fitted any of the tender pickup equipment, which is a great shame because you're relying on just the loco driving wheels, 6 of those. If they'd have just put the tender pickups in, they could have doubled the number of pickups. That would significantly reduce the current draw through each pickup. The wheels would stay cleaner for longer, and the loco would be much more reliable over points and dirty track, etc, etc. I think that is one cost-cutting measure too far. The base keeper plate isn't dreadfully easy to remove. It is hardwired in, but the wires are connected at one end of the base, which means you can pivot it upwards. So servicing is okay, not the easiest in the world. It does reveal the proper set of turned metal bearings on the wheel set, which is great to see. That is a good feature. Lots of very much more expensive models from the likes of Bachmann and Helgen do not have that feature. So the fact that this £100 model does prove that it can be done for a reasonable amount of money. Removing the body reveals the chassis. As you can see, it's a fairly standard looking chassis. The motor here, it's not clear whether this is a 3 or a 5-pole motor. It doesn't say which it is on Hornby.com. I suspect this is a 3-pole motor because other similar models I've tried in the past have had 3-pole motors, but I'm not going to mark it down unless the performance is poor. You can see there is a flywheel fitted to this motor though, and yes, the full-fat Hornby Railways version does not have a flywheel, would you believe? So that is another area where the railroad version is an improvement. You can see, unfortunately, the decoder socket is inside the locomotive and not the tender, which again is frustrating because all the infrastructure is there for the decoder socket to be put into the tender, where it is much more convenient, where it is much easier to fit sound and larger decoders. It's just they haven't done it. I think that's a real unfortunate shame. There is some effort to manage the wires. As you can see, that's all been taped to the chassis, so at least it is easy to remove the body without getting them snagged and everything. And as promised, I did remove the tender body, and the DCC socket and everything else that used to be in there has just been replaced by quite a lot of weights actually, probably too many. The tender is actually really heavy, to the point where I would suspect that it's going to be adding drag to the locomotive and therefore diminishing its pulling power. But with its impressive weight of 463 grams, maybe that won't be too much of a problem. The gauging is okay. Each back-to-back measured 14.4 to 14.5, which is completely adequate. So yeah, the mechanism is a little bit lackluster, isn't it? However, there is the possibility that this will run well. Some 3-pole motors do perform excellently, so let's give this a try and see whether or not this is one of the good ones. I should say this has not yet been run in. This will be its first ever test since it was unboxed, and therefore the performance may be better after 30 minutes of running in each direction. But let's try it. First question, does it work? Yes, it does. And in fact, I could see that flywheel action immediately. Watch this. I'm going to cut the power as the loco enters the frame. You ready? Cutting now. Beautiful flywheel action. Very impressive. So that's good. It seems to be working. I have noticed it seems to start off in quite a jerky manner, which is not great. And actually, I've turned it up to 70% speed and the loco's not coming back. And this is why locos need tender pickups. Had this loco been fitted with them, it would not have stopped here. It would have been an impossibility. As it is, it's cut out already. Yeah, I have to say, I don't think these cost-cutting measures on the mechanism are at all sensible. Why would you want to sacrifice performance? Detail people can live without. Poor running, I don't know anybody that would be satisfied with that. So yeah, fix it Hornby. £100 is cheap, but it's not cheap enough to make right these missing features. Anyway, how is the crawl? Like I say, I have noticed it starts off in quite a sudden and explosive way, so whether this is going to be a good crawler or not is remaining to be seen. I've started it backwards. Actually, that's better than I thought it would be. I thought it was going to just jerk into life. It is cogging quite a little bit. Ooh. It's sped up massively. I did not turn the knob there. Yeah, it was cogging quite a bit at the slower speeds, and given the fact that this has a substantial flywheel fitted, that suggests that this is just a 3-pole motor. And yeah, I would expect a 5-pole to be crawling better than this. And actually forwards, it does seem to be struggling. Let's try again. I'm turning it up really slowly. Still turning. There we go. Yeah, slow it down. I get it to slow down. No. Thought it had cut out on the points there. It hadn't. There's just no real torque at the lower speeds. So yeah, I mean, we know how cheap 5-pole motors are. No good reason for a 3-pole motor to be fitted, really, as far as I'm concerned, because they do work better. But it does work, it does seem to be nice. I like the flywheel action, that does smoothen it out. I bet there'd be a lot more cogging if that flywheel wasn't fitted, so credit where credit's due. How's the torque? Turning it up. Oh, wow, yeah, not much torque there, look at that. In fact, let me put my fingers in front so I'm not holding it down. Yeah, wheel set more or less coming to a stop. Let it go. Yeah. So it's not a particularly controlled and powerful motor inside this one at the moment. It could well blossom into a much better motor after running in. So I guess that's the only thing left to do now. I will set it off around the layout, 50% speed. Let's see how it handles the track, and let's see after an hour's running whether or not it's any better. All right, here we go. So in many ways the initial performance is a little bit lackluster and underwhelming, but don't forget this is not a £170 model of the kind I usually review. This thing is available for, you know, £100 or sometimes a little bit less. So while obviously I would prefer a better mechanism and better performance, it's not wholly unreasonable that this isn't performing as well as a 180 quid model or whatever. Although personally I do feel that for £100 it would have been possible to fit tender pickups and a 5-pole motor to this. I think it would have been worth it for the extra performance benefits. However, I'm not a manufacturer, maybe they are more expensive than I understand, so I'm prepared to consider that possibility. But it's working, it's not derailing, it's reasonably quiet. There does seem to be the odd knocking noise coming from it, which is a bit concerning, but I'll keep an eye on it, we'll keep it running in. and I won't pass final judgment until we come back. Okay, so I'll see you in an hour. Okay folks, I am back, and wow, that flywheel sure does carry this loco on when you cut the power. Okay, so on the one hand, the performance was fine. It didn't ever derail. It didn't cut out at the high speeds either on points and such, which is great. I did find out what was the cause of the knocking. Basically, it's due to the fact that the tender is quite loose on its drawbar. And actually the locomotive, as it runs, it's not dreadfully smooth. It's not a very smooth runner at all. It fluctuates in speed, it lurches, and every time it does so, the tender slams into the back of the loco cab, and that's what causes the thumping. So on the downside, that's very irritating and probably could have been sorted out with just a little bit of a design tweak. On the plus side though, it's nothing to do with the valve gear or the coupling rods or connecting rods. That's what I feared, and that would have been more of a serious problem. Okay, so it's now done 30 minutes running in each direction, so there should be no excuse for that poor crawl that we saw. Let's do backwards first though, because it was quite good backwards to start with. See if we can get it to crawl. Okay, so that is slower than it was before, but it's cogging dreadfully. Look at that, it's not a smooth motion, it's just made up of several sudden jerks. Keep turning it up. Okay, and at that speed, if I let go of the knob, you can see that torque trouble is still there. It hasn't really got the power to move itself, although if I give it some help, I think you'll find it will. Perhaps it won't. No, perhaps it won't. Oh, there we go, in the nick of time, before it showed me up as a fool. So yeah, it's not great. It's not great backwards, and that was the good direction, be reminded. Let's try it forwards. Turning up gentle. Whoa. That was about the worst it's done. So it's actually even worse, if anything. Let's try that again. Forwards. Turn it up gently, really gradual, and it's kicking in. And it hasn't even got the torque to carry on. Got to say, it's one of the worst crawlers I've ever seen, and it's a great shame because a 5-pole motor, a good quality 5-pole motor, or even a better quality 3-pole motor, would definitely have served this loco well. And it's cut out on the points. Can you see that? Give it a nudge. It starts. Oop. Don't want it to crash into the coaches. So yeah, that's disappointing. Pulling power though is really, really good. I measured 0.51 newtons, which should be enough for around 25 coaches on straight and level track, which is more than the Hornby Railways A4, so go figure. Bear in mind there is no torque in the mechanism, but as long as the wheels are turning, it will pull that much because of its weight, of course. So I've set up just 7 coaches for this loco. I don't want to overload it, even though it is a good runner, because the motors seem of dubious quality, shall I say? Is that polite enough? And I don't want to overstress it. But let's go for reverse and let's see if the coupling works. And this is not an easy one to control. There we go. I'm having to turn it up. There we go. Okay. So the lack of power is definitely more evident already now that I've coupled it up to some coaches. In fact, I'll tell you what, I'll hit it with 50% speed and we'll see how it accelerates. You ready? 3, 2, 1, 50. Well, it's like I've got that dinner plate hooked up to it with the weights on it. And on the middle line, I'm going to be running a different Hornby A4. This is also a railroad one. But there's a special reason I wanted to run this one today, because in some ways, in many ways, in fact, it demonstrates what a decline we've seen from Hornby in recent years. And it's a shame about that. So this loco is also a Hornby Railroad A4. I bought this in 2012 at a cost of £91. So that is obviously cheaper than the Hornby Railroad A4s that are available today. Not only that though, but I got a lot more for my money back in 2012. For instance, this loco does have the full decoration. It's got the full lining, the full colour and such on the different decals. That is much better than on the modern railroad ones. For my money, I did get a 5-pole motor, I did get tender pickups, and for my £91, I even got a DCC decoder fitted into this thing as well. Now, prices have had to go up over recent years. This I understand, and this I accept, because there is no choice. However, if Hornby are going to put the prices up and drag the quality down, This I do not accept. There's no good reason for that, okay? And every time Hornby do this, I'm going to call them out. If other reviewers don't, that's up to them. But you have my word, I will continue to call Hornby out when they do this, because increasing prices and reducing quality is definitely not on. So there it goes. And then on the inside, if I get it running in the right direction, we have the proper Hornby Railways A4, which is admittedly a far better performer. Yeah. So there you have it. More detailed, of course, but obviously more expensive as well. So let's watch the Railroad one. Let's see how it handles its coaches. That's at 50% speed, so it is reasonably fast, but not overly so. I mean, it is the world's fastest steam locomotive after all. So I'd say the gearing is at least competent. Okay, so as per usual with a Hornby mechanism, it's not struggling at all on the curves, and apparently not on Gordon's Hill either. And given the apparent lack of torque and the massive rake of coaches it's got, I think that is reasonably impressive. So, you know, overall, it's not a terrible model, is it? It looks okay, the performance is more or less adequate. You do obviously get what you pay for, or rather, you don't get what you haven't paid for. So at £100, it isn't a bargain or anything. I mean, the detail is basic. The mechanism has been heavily downgraded from better versions of this model, but it is functional. It is a blank canvas. You could definitely put some work into this thing and, you know, improve it. You could add the extra decoration if you wanted to. You could paint the cab. You could try and find a 5-pole motor to put inside there. Although anything mechanical, I think, is unreasonable. I don't think you should have to spend even more money on improving a mechanism that should have been good in the first place. But besides that, it's alright, isn't it? It's alright. And what's more, I can't help but really enjoy this thing. I mean, it's A4 Mallard. There's no way you're going to get something like this and dislike it. Sure, it has some features that I dislike, but overall, as a model, it's still got the magic of the A4, and it's still got the magic of Mallard. Maybe there's some value in that as well. But whether you buy something like this is now entirely up to you. I've covered everything I can think of with this. It has its pros, it has its cons. I suppose whether or not you go ahead and buy this will depend on whether the pros outweigh the cons. Let's have some ratings then for the Railroad A4 from Hornby. The level of detail I've given 2-star, which I appreciate is pretty harsh, obviously, and obviously the lack of detail is intentional with this model. However, that doesn't do anything to change the fact that this is a basic model deserving of 2-star in detail. So no painted cab or anything like that, no glazing in the windows. The decoration is largely simplified. Some of the buffers are sprung, others aren't. The tender is a very, very basic design. All of this absolutely fine, but obviously my score has to reflect it. It does, however, nicely capture the prototype and the proportions of the prototype, and overall it does look a good model from any sort of distance. The performance is a great shame because, like I say, I do have Hornby Railroad A4s that are absolutely sterling performers. This is not one of them though. The crawl, particularly forwards, backwards is okay. Forwards though isn't great, it lurches into action, which is a shame. There is lurching at the higher speeds as well, which causes the tender to crash into the loco continuously, making that annoying thudding noise. There's a noticeable lack of torque, particularly starting up with a load, and the lack of tender pickups does cause the occasional cutout on point at slow speeds, which of course does get worse as the loco runs more, meaning that wheel cleaning will be necessary more often on this than it would be on a loco with tender pickups. The pulling power though is pretty darn good, 0.51 newtons or approximately 30 coaches on straight and level track. This is of course thanks to just how darn heavy the loco is. Very, very heavy. Yes, there isn't very much torque there, and I certainly wouldn't recommend loading this one up too much, but if you want it, the pulling power is definitely there, which is great. The mechanism then, this is a real shame because Hornby normally get mechanisms right, but in this case they really haven't. They've deliberately taken out the tender pickups, which obviously impacts performance. They've also put the DCC socket into the locomotive, which is very inconvenient. I also suspect that this has a 3-pole motor, which does show when it comes to performance. If I'm wrong about that and there is a 5-pole motor inside this locomotive, then what I say to that is it's a very, very poor 5-pole motor because the performance is far, far poorer than the better Hornby Railways mechanism. It does have a flywheel though, which I thought was quite good, and it does have the proper bearings on the wheel set, which is a nice touch as well. Quality then, overall the quality is not terrible. I've only knocked off 1 star for the quality because there are just, I think, 3 very minor issues. Neither of them worth knocking off a star on their own, but I think overall I do need to do that. So first of all, the packaging, not very good, needs updating. Second of all, you've got those broken handrails, which perhaps on their own that might have been worth knocking off a star. And then you've got the slightly poor quality mechanism as well. Overall though, I don't think there's a huge quality issue. It has actually been put together reasonably nicely. Value for money then, RRP £110.99, £94 at Hatton's. And I tell you what, had this loco been fitted with a real top quality mechanism that allowed it to perform as well as the Hornby Railways version of the A4, this would definitely have gotten 5-star on value for money. But given how poor aspects of the mechanism are, I can't really give it 5-star on value for money. This model used to be cheaper, it used to have a 5-pole motor, it used to have the tender pickups. In 2021, it's just not as good a purchase as it used to be. That is an overall score then of 6.36 out of 10. Yeah, a little bit disappointing, but I suppose it could have been worse. Let's put that into the logbook then. There it is, 23rd place, just above the Busy Bee James from Bachmann and below the Bachmann LMS 10,000. But there's no getting away from the fact that the Hornby Railways version, or even the older Hornby Railroad versions, actually look and work quite a lot better. And you do get what you pay for, even though they are a lot more expensive. Well folks, that will just about do it for yet another review. Yes, overall not a terrible model by any means. It's just the fact is Hornby can do better, and around 10 years ago, they did. Do you enjoy seeing Hornby Railroad stuff reviewed? Maybe I should get in a few more of the Hornby Railroad locos and see what they're like. There are still quite a few that I haven't covered yet, particularly on the diesel front, so if that's something you would like to see, do comment down below and let me know. For now though, thank you very, very much for joining me for yet another review. I hope you enjoyed it, as always, and I will see you very, very soon for some more videos. Alright, cheers folks, you take care, I'll see you on the next one.